Name is James Eastman. Friends call me Jimmy, so I'm more commonly known as Jimmy Eastman. My father was Nathaniel Eastman, who was the son of James Eastman. So I'm named after my granddad. And my granddad's father's name was Paul Eastman. So the Eastmans are divided into the Nathan Eastman group and the Paul Eastman group. And their father was Gregory Eastman. They're the ones that reportedly came over on the ship to Liberia in 1860, sometime like that. So that is our lineage in the Eastman family. And from there, we've several brothers and sisters, marriages, and my father's mother was Blanche Cox, who's also from Crozierville, the Cox family from Crozierville. I believe her father's name was John Cox, and they also came over on the ship from the Barbados. And there are reports that when the Eastmans came over, that one of the brothers went to the U.S., decided to go to the U.S., emigrate to the U.S. And another of the brothers stopped in Sierra Leone, reportedly. So we're a pretty scattered out family. And we still have a few people left in Crozierville, but most people are now in the diaspora in different places in Monrovia and Liberia. My father told me that at the age of 10, his father simply disappeared. And there's no history of where he went or what happened to him. The last they heard of him was when he was 10 years old. So my father grew up with his uncle, Wilmot Eastman. Wilmot was James's brother, and both of them, their father were named Paul. So he lived with them for some time, and as his mother was a seamstress, Blanche Cox, and she was trying to put one on one together to earn a living. She did manage to build a house in Monrovia, right somewhere near the mansion where the executive mansion is today. So those days, things were, not as affluent as maybe today, but somehow they were able to etch a living. My father told me that the people that came over from the Barbados were artisans. They knew how to work with their hands. They were cobblers. They were fishermen. They were tailors, carpenters. So they knew how to work with their hands. So most of them were able to earn a living from the industry. And they used to sometimes go down the river at St. Paul to Monrovia and either exchange their goods or buy things, And so boat travel those days was very common for the people living in Crozierville. And they commonly referred to as upriver people because they were living further up the river as opposed to the river emptying in the Atlantic down the river in near what is called Monrovia today. My dad, after returning from the U.S., went to apply to the foreign ministry, and he was reportedly like a secretary or some clerk at the foreign ministry, and later applied to become a diplomatic or envoy of the Liberian State Department at the time. And fortunately for him, his first post was in the UN in New York. And at that time, I think the first ambassador who was there was Ambassador Doe, and later Ambassador Nathan Barnes replaced him. So we stayed in the U.S. almost about 8 years, from 1960 to about just the end of 68, almost 69. And after serving at the UN, he was later assigned to the embassy in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. At that time, they had the ECA, which is a branch of the UN, Economic Commission of Africa, and the OAU was there, the Organization of African Unity. So again, it was a very strategic post, significant because these were headquarters. And so he got that exposure as well. And after the passing of Tubman, President Tubman, when President Tolbert, after being inaugurated, appointed new cabinet, and he named to his cabinet Cecil Dennis. You know, Cecil Dennis was one of my dad's old running buddies, and my dad asked him to join him at the ministry, you know, since my dad was already, you know, into the diplomatic field. And this was new to Cecil. He was a lawyer by trade. And so my dad was appointed as Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs, mostly African affairs. And that's when we finally came back home in 1973, having left in 1960. Just coming home for the first time to live in 1973. My father had a short stint because he ended up returning to Addis Ababa, this time as ambassador, in 1975, 76. And he stayed there for a good amount of time, and later they assigned him on, in fact, my father, when the coup took place in 1980, my father made it possible for President Doe, or at that time, Master Sergeant Doe, to travel to Ethiopia. That was his first foreign visit ever. And so the CIC Doe went to Addis Ababa, and my father introduced him, accommodated him, and introduced him to the international forum. Later, about, when was this? In about 1984, 85, my father was appointed to Germany, where he served until his retirement, finally, in 1989. So that's my father's career, pretty much, in a nutshell. So growing up as a, children or a son of a diplomat, it is somewhat of a privileged life, I would say, simply because you live in an embassy that is paid for. You have a driver, you have servants, you have all these emoluments as they afford diplomats. So you kind of experience a very manicured life in a way. Also, you're exposed to various diplomats, families, and children as well. So you're used to international contact. You're used to talking to people of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different countries. So you kind of get very accustomed to different kind of people, and so you find yourself choosing friends not based on things in common, but just the ability to associate and mingle. So at one point my best friend was an Indian fellow. At another point he was a Jewish fellow. At another point he was, it's just who you meet and how you how you tick, how you get, and that, I think, that affords you a neutrality. You don't base things on prejudice. Like if you don't see somebody of your color, well, you befriend the next person. So you kind of less inclined to be prejudiced. I think you're more neutral, and then you're used to meeting dignitaries of all. I've shaken president's hand. I've shaken the emperor's hand, and so you get at an early age, you get accustomed to meeting people of some stature, and you live in a kind of cherished life where everything is taken care of. So it's a privilege to be able to experience something like that. And in the latter years, when I after realizing that sometime in my life, I realized, well, that was all great and grand, but it doesn't show what I can do, because that is a life that is supported by government, and it's different when you're doing it on your own. I've grown up in New York, though, living in Queens Regal Park. At that time, it was predominantly a Jewish neighborhood, very Jewish. There's so much Jewish that on a Jewish holiday, it was no school. I mean, we went to school, but there was nothing going on in the class. We just played games. So it was very, 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 very Jewish neighborhood. And all my first friends were Jewish. All my first friends, I used to hang out, wait for them sometimes after Hebrew school. We'd go hang out, and I'm sure there are worse cases of racism, but I didn't remember them. It's only till my father told me of an incident one time that one fellow on the playground, he was an older guy, only called me the N-word. I didn't remember this at all. And he said, and then my dad told me that. I said, no, I thought about it. I said, no, you're the N-word. That's what I told him. He said, no. How can you call? No, you're the. And I said, no. You're the N-word, not me. You got it all mixed up here. My dad told me he died laughing because the guy started panicking that I didn't realize that, he was trying to put me down, and I just simply threw it back in his face. But being in a just Jewish neighborhood at that time, I don't think we experienced that much racism. I'm sure there was, but it wasn't too profound. you know, because New York has always been a melting pot of people of different. And then later on, some more people started moving in the neighborhood. A lot of Puerto Ricans started moving in. We were joined by one other Liberian family, Mr. Noel Theodore Dennis, who later became the Auditor General for. So I had a Liberian friend now, and then other Liberians started. Wadsworth joined us, Ben Wadsworth, Brewer, Marlon Brewer, Dr. Brewer's son. So that it got to be more. We were the first there, but later on, a couple of Liberian families came, and I never really experienced racism at all. It's not marked with that, except that later on you get to know about it. You know, I remember during Dr. Martin Luther King, when he was assassinated, there are just two very essential things I remember. I remember Kennedy's assassination because it was huge for the nation at that time. And it was huge for me. It was a big deal. You know, I thought, you know, it's etched in my mind all those things that happened at that time. It was like the worst thing could happen. And the second time, the worst thing that happened was the murder of Martin Luther King, and things went wild. And that was my first time seeing my father saddened. Before then, I didn't know very much about Martin Luther King. I wasn't aware of the kind of struggles. Again, we were innocent of a lot of these things, but there was a lot of racial struggles going on. At that time, the movement for equal rights was very, you know, was very prominent, and the death led to a lot of stuff on TV. We showed a lot of chaos on TV, a lot of burning, but again, it didn't touch our neighborhood because it was, again, predominantly, you know, Jewish and white, and speckled with few different ethnicities. So I would say racism is, I haven't experienced a lot of racism, but going to Ethiopia, surprisingly now, going to Ethiopia, I just found that the Ethiopians they felt West Africans were inferior to them. And they had a similar word, which would be the same N word, but it would be in their language, and they call it Baria. So if you were darker skinned, because if you notice the Ethiopians, they have, they have different type of features. The features more, because they're mixed with the Arabic tribes. So they were mixed with the Arab influence, with Middle East influence at that time. So their hair is curly, wavy sometimes. Their skins are lighter. They have a lighter skin. Not all of them, but there's some tribes that are like that. And thinner lips. So when they see somebody of more West African features, they have a way of calling them the word or looking down on them. But mind you, their whole society was like that. Even their own tribes, like they have one tribe called the Gala tribe, and that is a derogatory word of calling the Oromo tribe. But it was in the history books, and when I used to read Ethiopian history, it was there as a common word. It's only later I learned that you can't call people Gala. And there's another one tribe called Gurage. So their whole society has a way of looking down on each other. You know, they look down on other tribes and people. But in Ethiopia, southern Ethiopia, they have people just like West Africans, and people who border near like the Sudan, you know, very dark skin, and they're there, but they I guess it's because of that influence of the Arabic influence, or the influence of the time, made them in a very much way racist. Dad was one who appreciated the arts. My dad tried to imbue a lot of culture in me. On Sundays he'd listen to classical music, and I had to study on Sundays while he's there, and so I got used to listening to classic. But I had to know each and every composer. If there's a piece that came on, I had to be able to tell him the name of the piece and the composer. So Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, Chopin. I could go through Schumann. I could go through an array of these people. I knew their music by heart, and he used to try to expose us to fine art. He used to take us to, Broadway shows, Radio City. I can remember one incident where I went to see Marcel Marceau. Marcel Marceau is the famous French pantomime, very famous. And we went to see him. And in class, I remember strongly my teacher asked, "Do you all know who Marcel Marceau is?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I know who he is. Only black kid in the class." I said, "Yeah, I know who he is." And she said, "Who was he?" I said, he's a pantomime." And I said, who is he? I said, "He's a pantomime." So how do you know that? I said, "I went to see him." She said, "You went to see him?" I said, "Yeah, I went to see him. My dad took me to see him." So you can see my father tried his best to introduce us to, these cultural artifacts and fine art, music, and all that sort of thing to get us, that's the kind of person he was. He loved reading. Those days were Newsweek and Time. He was a person of the world. He was very much a person of the world and the cultures of the world. He loved all that sort of thing. For me, I think your relationship with human beings is where your best qualities are. And everybody who knew him said he was a very friendly guy they could talk to, was kind, they could relate to him. Everybody could relate to him. And, and I think that is, that's his biggest asset, that he was relatable. He spoke Bassa, he spoke Bele, he was a guy, very relatable guy to everybody. He wasn't one of those, people who didn't know how to associate with other people. He could associate with anybody, and anybody could associate with him. So he very affable guy, and that's who he was. And I think that was his best quality, that his people endeared themselves to him. They try and they remember him that way. And it went a lot when I met people and they said, "Who's you?" They said, "Oh, wow, that's your dad." They said, "Man, he was such a nice guy." They warmed up to me, So he was that kind of guy. People warmed up to him. He knew how to make the people feel relaxed and comfortable around him. So my mom was Rachel Giddens, and her parents also came from Barbados. Looking at the list of the families that came, her great grandfather, great grandfather was on there. His name was Lionel Giddens, and he was an officer of the court. I think he was like a sheriff or bailsman, something like that, to the court. And She also had an opportunity to go to the United States for her education. She went to Tuskegee. At the time, it was the Institute. She graduated from Tuskegee with a degree in home economics. And pretty much she was more stayed home. Most of the time we were in the U.S., she stayed home. She didn't work all that much. And she taught me, sat down with me, taught me from at an early age. And she was more the disciplinarian in the family. I remember more whipping from her than anyone else with the wooden spoon. That was a dreaded word in our house, the wooden spoon. Because, my father, once in a while he'd have to intervene, but it was not really in his nature to be too strict. Like I told you, he was one of those kind of guys who just rather do things in a more affable way, more friendly way. And every now and then he had to put his foot down. And he used to love going out too. So my mom had to be the one at home, keeping things on track. And I owe her a lot because I believe she laid the foundation for me to be well educated. I think it's important to have a very solid educational foundation at early age. Your elementary foundation, I think, is fundamental, and because everything else is built upon it. So I owe her that because she took her time to teach me, and later on I could teach my younger siblings. So that's how our household run. Dad was out working and mom was home. You could always talk to mom. She was always home. So I've been taking a couple of turns. I entered LU to do engineering. I actually wanted to do computer science, but they didn't have. So the nearest thing was electrical engineering. And I wanted to go away and to study it. But I was a bit naive about a whole lot of things. So I got discouraged and I decided to switch major, and I ended up studying mathematics and economics. But somewhere between there, I took a couple of scholarships, still trying to incorporate engineering. I did study aviation in Israel, and then later I went to Ivory Coast and studied power engineering. So I always been doing a mix of engineering and economics. And then when I finally came to back to the States, after getting married, I got married in 1986. And then the war happened in 1990. And for 4 years, we were destitute in Ghana for 4 years. And then in 1995, upon my father's death, I came to the U.S. and started working for Bell Atlantic, the telephone company. And I was fortunate to be able to further my education, earning a MBA and a master's in information and telecommunication systems from Johns Hopkins, and other project management from Villanova, and advanced graduate certificates from Stevens Institute of Technology. So I've been just trying to pursue a very professional career in telecommunications. And so now I'm a manager in the field, and that's pretty much my my professional educational background. I love a lot of Liberian food, and it's hard to just tell. I mean, which is my favorite, but I will say if I had to, I prefer cassava leaf, and then maybe second to cassava leaf is pound butter. I love pound butter, and then in fact all Liberian foods I pretty much love. But if I had to make, if from the youth, I go with what I was. I still remember though at the age of 3, and there was something going on, some kind of celebration. This was before we went to the States, and I remember eating cassava leaf. And to today, I remember that's when my cassava leaf became my favorite. So since I was 3 years old, I've always said cassava leaf is my favorite meal. Yeah, a couple of things my dad did. My dad was sometimes when he come home and he's a little bit, had a few come from some cocktail or celebration. He'd come and he introduced us to some new song where we don't know. And I can say one song we had to sing this song. He says, "You have to sing this song," and we say, "Yeah, okay, Dad, what's the song?" He said, "I am the same." And we have to say it. I am the same. Mademoiselle, Mademoiselle, that you saw in the house, by the barn. So when he comes home and in a merry mood like that, he'd always tell us make us sing some songs, way out songs, from some experience he had. He'd make us sing those, and I think that's one of the funniest things I can remember my dad. When he came home, he was feeling good like that. He'd make us, and I can tell there was various songs like that he used to force us to sing. It was all good, and I'm sure my siblings might remember this too. But that's one thing about our dad. He was always somebody. You full of fun. That's what he was principle. He wasn't one who liked a lot of argument. He was never like that. He'd rather have fun, and if you sit down and talk, you could talk about anything with him, politics, all that. He was huge in politics and that, being a diplomat. You could have all kinds of conversations with him. And he also was the reason I didn't pursue a career in diplomacy. He didn't discourage me. He said I shouldn't do it. His reason was that I'd have to, I don't know how to put this, but I had to kiss ass. He didn't think, he said the way it's structured, you have to be, bowing down to people or have to submit to people in the wrong way. That what he didn't really like. So he totally discouraged me from going in the field. Even though I really would have loved that because I like intermingling with different people from foreign. I mean, that's how I grew up. But he terribly, he influenced me. He said it wasn't where he thought it was good that I go.
In our lives like that, he wanted to know everything we did. He'll question us. He'll give us a little affirmation. Like he gave me, little affirmation to say, and he was just a person that he was just a well-rounded father.
That's true. And I got other memories. I know he taught me how to play chess and Scrabble.
He would love to be remembered as someone who never abandoned his country. No matter what Liberia was going through, he couldn't go work for someone else. He felt a very close tie to Liberia, and it's exemplified by no matter who was in the mansion, he'd do his job diligently. So he would want to be remembered as a statesman. He used to tell me, though, there were certain things he didn't agree with that were wrong. He thought some people were being marginalized. Some tribes, there was this settler and native divide, and he felt this is the treatment of our brothers on the from that ethnic background, where some of it was not fair. It's not treated. He told me about so at an early age, I already knew there was something going on in Liberia that was not correct, and that was some of this unfair treatment or unequal treatment that some people have more privileges and some more than others. And he said it wasn't right. He told me about a time that the University of Liberia, because there were no settler children graduating, they skipped that year. They didn't graduate any. I couldn't believe it. I said, what? Yeah, he said no. And so he kind of told me about these things that were wrong. Something like his cousin, Albert Port. Albert Port used to talk about the ills. They had the same, I don't know, it was common about the people in Crozierville, but they didn't subscribe to the wrong, ill treatment of the people or marginalization of people. They didn't subscribe to it. They thought it was wrong, unfair. And he taught me that at a very early age. So I grew up with that. So when I heard, Albert Port and stuff talking about it, I said, well, there's the same stuff my dad been telling me from a very early age. That it's not fair the way some people are being treated or denied, and it shouldn't be that way. And he felt strongly against it, but then, one has to also keep food on the table. So it was a balance between those things.